Here we are at the Paulinskill Viaduct in Knowlton Township, New Jersey. This is part of the Lackawanna Cut-Off, which I'm starting a series program where we'll look at various parts of the cut-off on different episodes. I'm Chuck Walsh. I'm president of the North Jersey Rail Commuter Association. And I've been working on the Lackawanna Cut-Off project for almost 30 years now. And over the past 5 years, we've actually been seeing some progress that has been made in terms of rebuilding the line. Now, what exactly is the cut-off? The Lackawanna Cut-Off is a railroad line that was built between 1908 and 1911 between the southern tip of Lake Apatcong and the Delaware Water Gap in Pennsylvania. The line is 28.5 miles long, and the purpose of the line was to replace an old line which was circuitous and slow. Now, this particular bridge, which when it was built, when completed in 1910, was the largest reinforced concrete structure in the world. It's 115 feet from where I'm standing, vertical to where the track was. Right now the line is abandoned. The Lackawanna Railroad ran trains over the Lackawanna Cut-Off from 1911 until 1960. In 1960, the Lackawanna merged with the Erie, and creating the Erie-Lackawanna. And then the Erie-Lackawanna ran trains until 1976, when Conrail took over the line and then ran service until 1979. In 1979, after the track was put out of service, Conrail decided to move all its traffic, it's at that point freight traffic, from the cut-off to other east-west lines. And in 1984, the line was abandoned and the track was removed. And between that time and the time that the line was eventually acquired by the state of New Jersey in 2001, there was a long and protracted effort on both sides of the Delaware River, in other words here in New Jersey and also in Pennsylvania, to save the line. Now, where we are right now is about 65 miles from the Hudson River and roughly about 70 or so miles from Scranton. The Lackawanna Cut-Off Restoration Project, which is a New Jersey Transit project and is in progress for rebuilding the line 7.5 miles from Port Morris to Andover, New Jersey. While that is in progress, we'll talk about that in more episodes, but for now we'll concentrate on a little bit of the history of the line out here in northwestern New Jersey. Now, as I mentioned, this was the largest railroad reinforced concrete structure in the world at one time. There's another viaduct that is just only 4 miles from here, which crosses over Route 80 in the Delaware River. And many of you may be familiar with that. You may see it on Route 80 when you go through the Delaware Water Gap. But here, this is a structure which is kind of hidden. Most people don't know it's here. If you were not to travel on this road here, you probably would never see it. But it has been featured in Weird New Jersey, and in fact, at times, unfortunately, there have been things that have happened here. I remember coming here in the 1980s when the cut-off was privately owned, and there were bungee jumpers going off of probably one of the arches that was over the river. And in recent years, there have been people who have managed to get them stuck in the holes or the portholes that go into the structure that allow inspectors to go through, but they've had to be pulled out, and unfortunately no one was seriously injured, but there have been things like that have occurred. Now, in terms of what the future prospects for rail service on this line is, we'll talk about in future episodes. But suffice to say, there is definitely an effort to reactivate the line, possibly into northeastern northeastern Pennsylvania, possibly as far as Scranton at some point. We'll certainly be looking at those possibilities and some of the issues that surround that potential service. The only other thing I can possibly say about this, I think I mentioned that we're in Knowlton Township, New Jersey. The structure, the bridge is known as the Paulinskill Viaduct, and that's named after the river, the Paulinskill. It's not the Paulinskill River, it's the Paulinskill. I get corrected by historians which tell me that it would be incorrect to say the Paulinskill River. The Hainesburg Viaduct, of course, refers to this, where we are physically is near the town of, or the hamlet of Hainesburg. Now there's a little bit more railroad history we can talk about, literally at the spot I am standing at. The Cut-Off, when it opened in 1911, wasn't the first railroad that was physically here. In fact, if you pan around to this spot here, you can look at this foundation, and I believe this was either a freight or something having to do with milk delivery on the New York Susquehanna Western Railroad, which ran essentially about where I'm standing right now. There actually were 3 different railroads that ran through here. Technically 2, but 3 actually, if you want to look at it that way. Originally, John I. Blair, whose name you may remember as the one who's after whom the town of Blairstown is named. Blair built a railroad from the center of Blairstown through here to the town of Delaware. Now you would think, well, that's kind of a strange thing, going basically from the middle of nowhere to the middle of nowhere. And it was basically Blair had a method of madness to his thinking, because what he was really doing was building a potential line that another railroad would come into use. Now there was actually a legend that when, and this we're talking about 1880 now, there was actually a legend that Blair had built the line, which is maybe about 8 or 10 miles long, to allow his wife to go to the Delaware station, which was on the Lackawanna. That was the old line before the Cut-Off was built. That it would allow his wife to go shopping in New York, which is kind of ridiculous. Blair was one of the wealthiest men in America at that time, and certainly, even though we know he was frugal, he could have afforded to have his wife pay for a carriage to go to the station and not have to build an actual railroad to get there. But that legend is really, I don't believe there's any truth in it. Actually, what really happened was that Blair was building a railroad in order so that the New York Susquehanna and Western would buy the railroad from him to use to go through here, and that's what happened. And actually, there was a second railroad, the Lehigh and New England Railroad, which also ran through here. So, well, except for that foundation over here, there's really nothing to show for that railroad being here. But if you see old photos, there's a station here underneath the viaduct, literally in that area right in there, that was referred to as Hainesburg. And there was actually a Hainesburg Junction over down there, but we're getting far afield in terms of the discussion here. But there's a lot of history here. That's the thing. But in terms of the Cut-Off, which is up there, my first time over the Cut-Off, and my one and only time in both directions the same day, was sometime either June or July of 1960. So we're talking now 56 years ago since I've been on a train on top of this bridge. I don't really remember very much of that particular trip, and but I do remember certain things, and I do remember, and I've seen this in videos, so it brought back, in a sense, flashbacks, going over the bridge, which is quite an amazing type of experience, because you really are well above this whole area. You can see the Delaware Water Gap in that direction. You can't actually see Route 80 from here, but we're about 4 miles from Route 80. But you can see everything from on top, and that one thing I do remember going over this bridge. So in any case, that's our starting point. This is really the first, as I said, of many videos. We'll go in very different spots on the cutoff. This being, though, in a sense, on the Lackawanna Cut-Off in New Jersey, the New Jersey Cut-Off, as we also refer to it as, this is really the gem and the the jewel in the crown, if you will, of the cutoff. This is the largest structure, is the most significant structure, and in a sense, it's really the signature structure on the entire line. But certainly there's much more to talk about, and we will do that over the coming weeks and months. Thank you for listening.